All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep into the fascinating world of Luxembourgish. This one was a listener request, and I have to admit it's not a language you hear every day, but that makes it even more interesting to uncover, right?
Absolutely.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is Luxembourgish? Where does it fit into all the languages out there?
That's a great question, and it really gets right to the heart of how we define language versus dialect, which, let me tell you, can get surprisingly tricky, especially when we're talking about Europe.
Yeah, those lines can definitely get blurry. So where does Luxembourgish fit in? Give us the lowdown.
Okay, so Luxembourgish is part of the West Central German language family. Think of it like this.
Yeah.
It's in the same linguistic neighborhood as some dialects you'd hear in Germany. And here's a twist, even some dialects spoken in Romania.
Romania. Now, that's a connection I definitely wasn't expecting. How on earth did that happen?
It's actually a fascinating little historical tidbit. Back in the Middle Ages, you had these communities of German speakers known as Transylvanian Saxons. They settled in Transylvania, which, as you know, is now a part of Romania, and they brought their language with them. And amazingly, over centuries, it's held on to those linguistic links to Luxembourgish.
Wow, what a story.
Yeah.
Just goes to show how languages can travel and endure over time and across borders.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to circle back to for a long time. Luxembourgish wasn't seen as its own distinct language, right? It was considered more of a dialect of German.
Precisely. For quite a while, that's exactly how it was classified, just a dialect. It wasn't until around World War II that things really started to shift. That's when Luxembourgish went through what linguists call Ausbau.
Ausbau. Okay, I'm going to need you to unpack that one. What does that mean? How does a dialect actually make that leap and become recognized as a language?
In simple terms, it's about developing standardized forms of vocabulary, grammar, even spelling. For example, let's take the word for to ride a bike. In many German dialects, it's Fahrradfahren, right?
Oh.
But in Luxembourgish, they say Velofahren. It's more concise, and it's a perfect illustration of how Luxembourgish was starting to carve out its own distinct linguistic identity.
Fascinating. So it wasn't just about separating from German, but about creating something that was uniquely Luxembourgish.
Yeah.
And I imagine that must have been a pretty daunting task, especially given the historical context at the time.
Absolutely. Just imagine. At the same time that Luxembourgish was trying to solidify its own identity, there was this huge push for one standard German happening across Europe.
Right.
So you've got this relatively small language fighting for recognition in the midst of this much larger movement pushing for linguistic uniformity.
Talk about an uphill battle. It's like they were swimming against the tide. But that's what makes this story so compelling, right? And it makes you wonder, even once Luxembourgish had established its own unique identity, does it still face challenges within Luxembourg itself? I mean, it's a very multilingual country, isn't it?
You hit the nail right on the head. Luxembourg may be geographically small, but linguistically, it's like a powerhouse. Most people there speak not one, not two, but three languages fluently: Luxembourgish, German, and French.
Wow, three languages. That's amazing. But I can also see how that would create a whole other set of challenges for Luxembourgish.
Absolutely. Think of it this way. You've got French and German, these major global languages with a ton of resources behind them, books, movies, television shows, you name it. It's tough for any smaller language to compete with that, even on its own home turf.
It's like trying to stand out in a crowded marketplace, even when it's your hometown.
Yeah.
So how does Luxembourgish navigate that challenge?
That, my friend, is a question we'll dig into a little bit later. But first, I want to tell you about one of the most interesting chapters in the story of Luxembourgish, how it went about standardizing its written form. It's a story about dedication, ingenuity, and even a little bit of linguistic rebellion.
All right, you've got my attention. I'm always up for a good language rebellion story, so tell me more.
You know, it's easy to get bogged down in all the technical stuff when we talk about language.
Yeah.
You know, like grammar rules or how to pronounce things perfectly. But when you really get down to it, language is all about connection, communication.
Oh, absolutely. It's how we share our stories, our ideas, how we build relationships with each other, all those things that really make us human.
Exactly. And I think with Luxembourgish, that sense of connection is even stronger because it occupies such a unique position. It's this national language, but at the same time, it's so closely intertwined with the languages and cultures of its neighbors. It's a tricky balance.
Totally. It's like this linguistic high wire act, balancing those different influences.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the people of Luxembourg, they're doing this incredible linguistic dance every single day, switching between French, German, and Luxembourgish effortlessly.
Now that is impressive. But do you think all that code switching, that constant juggling act between languages, has it had any kind of impact on Luxembourgish itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's one that keeps linguists up at night, believe me. But seriously, it's pretty clear that this multilingual environment has had a huge impact on how Luxembourgish has evolved. We see it in the borrowed words, the way the grammar has developed.
So the language itself is like a reflection of Luxembourg's history, this blend of different cultures all coming together.
Precisely. Luxembourgish is a perfect example of just how adaptable language can be, how it absorbs and changes based on its surroundings.
And that adaptability is probably more important now than ever, right? With globalization, technology, languages are constantly bumping up against each other these days.
You're absolutely right. It's just like in nature, you know? The species that thrive are the ones that can adapt to different environments. And the ones that can't, well, they're the ones that risk fading away.
So what's being done to make sure Luxembourgish not only survives, but really thrives in this constantly changing world? What are the survival tactics?
Well, one of the most important things is promoting literacy. Remember earlier we were talking about the limited resources available in Luxembourgish?
Right.
Well, that's starting to change.
Oh, that's good to hear. So more books, more media, more ways for people to actually use the language in their daily lives?
Exactly. There's a real push to produce more literature in Luxembourgish, more films, even video games. And that's especially important for younger generations.
It's about making the language feel relevant to them, showing it's not just something from the past, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it's not just about entertainment either. They're also integrating Luxembourgish more into the education system, into government, even the business world.
That's huge. For a language to really thrive, it needs to have a place in all aspects of life, not just be relegated to homes or informal settings.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating a space where Luxembourgish can flourish alongside these other languages, French and German. And you know what? It seems to be working. There's a real sense of pride in the language that I haven't seen before, a real recognition of its cultural value.
That is inspiring to hear. I love that. It just shows that languages aren't static, they're dynamic. They reflect the communities that speak them. And with enough effort, enough passion, enough creativity, we can help them grow.
Well said. It all comes down to connecting the language with that next generation, showing them that Luxembourgish is a living, breathing part of their identity.
Speaking of the future, we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the challenges, the historical backdrop. But what does the future hold for Luxembourgish?
The million-dollar question. If only I had a crystal ball.
No easy answers then.
Not this time. But I think we can look to the past, see what's happening in the present, and then make conscious choices that will support languages like Luxembourgish.
Because language is so much more than just words on a page or sounds that we make. It's about who we are, where we come from, our shared history.
Beautifully put. Every language tells a story. And it's our responsibility to listen to that story, to learn from it, and ultimately to help keep that story alive.
And sometimes those stories, they take us in some pretty unexpected directions, much like this deep dive into the world of Luxembourgish.
I'll say, we've traced its journey, explored all its little quirks.
We've seen its resilience, that fighting spirit.
But like any good story, there's still one final chapter I think we need to explore, Luxembourgish and the digital world.
Right, because these days, a language's survival is deeply connected to its online presence, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's not enough for a language to just exist in its spoken and written forms anymore. These days, it needs to have a digital footprint.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's dominated by technology. If a language is invisible in those online spaces, well, it's practically invisible to a huge chunk of the population, especially younger generations.
You've hit the nail on the head. And that lack of visibility, it can have a huge impact, especially for young people who've grown up surrounded by technology. If they don't see their language reflected in the digital world, they might not value it as much. It's like a language needs to be digitally fluent to survive.
Ooh, digitally fluent.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. And it's not just about being able to, browse the web. It's about a language having a voice, having a presence in the digital space. So how is Luxembourgish doing in terms of digital fluency? Is it keeping up with the times, or is there still a lot of work to be done?
That's another million-dollar question. And I'm afraid the answer, like most things related to language, is a bit nuanced.
Right, because it's about more than just having a few websites in Luxembourgish or being able to post on social media, isn't it?
Exactly.
Right.
We're talking about a much deeper level of integration here. We need to make sure that Luxembourgish has a place at the table in every aspect of the digital world.
So we're talking things like language learning apps, voice recognition software,
Yeah.
even artificial intelligence that can actually understand and respond to Luxembourgish.
Exactly. Those are the front lines where the real fight for digital fluency is taking place.
Because if a language is missing from those cutting-edge technologies, it risks being left behind in this rapidly changing digital world. It's almost like being excluded from a whole new world of possibilities.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about making sure that Luxembourgish is seen as a language of the future, not a relic of the past.
A future where technology is only going to become even more central to how we communicate and experience the world around us.
Precisely. So buckle up, because next we're going to dive headfirst into this digital landscape and see how Luxembourgish is navigating this exciting, challenging, and ever-evolving terrain.
Because in a lot of ways, understanding this digital dimension is key to understanding the future of Luxembourgish. All right, so we're diving headfirst into this digital world of Luxembourgish. Where do we even begin to measure its digital footprint?
Well, a good place to start is by looking at the resources that are available, for both speakers and learners. And one really encouraging sign is that we're seeing more and more online dictionaries and language learning platforms specifically designed for Luxembourgish.
That makes sense, right? I mean, those are the foundational tools.
Yeah.
And having them readily available online, that removes a huge barrier for people who are interested in learning.
Exactly. And it's not just about dictionaries and grammar lessons either. There are also these really vibrant online communities and forums where Luxembourgish speakers and enthusiasts from all over the world can connect and chat with each other.
Oh, I bet that sense of community is incredibly important, especially for a smaller language like this. It's a way to build those connections that go beyond geographical borders.
Precisely. It's about fostering that sense of shared identity and pride in the language.
It's like building a digital gathering place where people can celebrate this unique part of their heritage.
And speaking of celebrations, we can't forget about the role of social media in all of this. Social media has been huge for Luxembourgish, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they've become such dynamic spaces for sharing content in Luxembourgish. Everything from news articles to poetry. It's really amazing to see.
It really goes to show you the power of social media, right? It can give a voice to these languages that might not have the same reach as those global giants. It's a way for Luxembourgish to connect with a much wider audience.
Yeah. And it's not just about passively reading posts either. Social media allows people to have these real-time conversations in Luxembourgish, to interact, to play with the language in all sorts of creative ways. And I imagine that's crucial for keeping the language feeling alive and relevant, especially for younger generations.
You're exactly right. That creativity and that playfulness, those are the things that help a language evolve and adapt to this fast-paced digital world. But, in the spirit of fairness, it's not all sunshine and roses in the digital realm, is it? Earlier, we were talking about some of those technological hurdles, things like voice recognition and AI. How's Luxembourgish doing in those areas?
Yeah, that's where things get a bit more complicated.
You said it. While there has been some progress in developing voice recognition software for Luxembourgish, it still lags behind the bigger, more widely spoken languages.
That makes sense, though, right? I mean, those technologies require massive amounts of data to learn. And with a smaller language like Luxembourgish, the data pool is inherently going to be smaller.
It's the classic chicken and egg problem, isn't it? You need more people using the technology to generate more data, but you also need the technology to be good enough to entice people to use it in the first place. It's a real challenge for a lot of these lesser spoken languages.
It's a tough spot to be in, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not insurmountable, right? I mean, there have to be ways to bridge that data gap.
Absolutely. And one of the most promising approaches we're seeing is through collaborative projects. Researchers, developers, even just language communities themselves are coming together to gather and organize data specifically for these under-resourced languages.
So it's like a digital team effort, everyone pitching in to make sure these languages have a fighting chance online.
Exactly. And it's not just about altruism either. I think people are finally starting to realize that linguistic diversity is actually really important for a thriving digital space. Having everyone speak the same language online, even metaphorically, well, that would make for a much less interesting internet, wouldn't it?
A digital world that reflects the incredible linguistic richness of the real world? Now that's something worth striving for. So, zooming back in on Luxembourgish, are there any specific projects or initiatives that you think are doing a particularly good job at boosting its digital presence?
One really great example is the creation of a Luxembourgish language corpus. Basically, it's this massive database of text and spoken language data that can be used to train those very technologies we were just talking about, like voice recognition and AI.
So they're tackling that data problem head on, pooling resources and building this incredible shared resource, this treasure trove of linguistic information. I love it.
Exactly. And it's not just about quantity either. They're really focused on quality too. They've gone to great lengths to make sure that this corpus represents the true diversity of Luxembourgish, including regional dialects and what we call registers of speech, basically how people speak depending on the situation they're in.
So whether it's a formal speech or a casual conversation with friends, they're making sure the technology can understand it all. That's great.
Precisely. And that same dedication to accuracy, you see it reflected in other initiatives too, like the development of a spell checker and grammar checker specifically for Luxembourgish. These are invaluable tools when you're writing anything online.
Oh, I know. It's so easy to make little mistakes, even in your native language when you're typing quickly. Having those tools helps maintain the integrity of the language in the digital world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's all about creating those spaces, those digital spaces where Luxembourgish isn't just present, but it can truly thrive.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Luxembourgish, I have to say I'm walking away with a sense of cautious optimism. The challenges are very real, but the passion, the creativity, the sheer effort that's going into keeping this language alive and thriving in the digital age, well, it's really inspiring.
Cautious optimism. I think you nailed it with that phrase. What is it that makes you feel optimistic?
It's seeing how people are tackling these challenges head on. And they're doing it with such creativity, such determination. They're not just preserving a language, they're making sure it has a voice in this digital age. They're building that bridge to the future, one step at a time.
And in doing so, they're showing the rest of the world what's possible. Who knows? Maybe their efforts will inspire others to do the same for their own languages. Just imagine a digital world that's as diverse and vibrant as the real one.
Now that's a future worth fighting for. And for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to explore the world of Luxembourgish a little further, be sure to check out the show notes. We've got links to all sorts of great resources, dictionaries, language learning platforms, those online communities we talked about, and more.
Don't be shy. Dive in and discover the beauty of Luxembourgish.
Happy exploring, everyone. And with that, that wraps up this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.